done by TCP. So segments are created when you are using TCP at layer 4, and datagrams are created if you are using UDP at layer 4. So if you are using UDP, then your payload will be known as datagram. If you are using TCP, then payload will be known as segment. Right, so that's how you can pose that. Then inside TCP header, we had like source port number, destination port number, and I told you that in TCP, the source port number, like whoever will initiate the TCP connection, the source port number is going to be a random port number, and the destination port number will always remain a well-known port number, right? And when responder will respond back with SYN-ACK, right? So in that condition, the port numbers will be reversed. Like source port number will be well known, and destination will be the random port number. So that depends. I mean, the source port number and destination port number, that basically depends that are you talking about the initiator or you are talking about the responder. So at the end of initiator, the source port number will always be a random and destination will always be a well-known port number. But at the end of responder, the source will be well-known and destination will be a random port number. So that's how you can, I mean, you can just go through that, or this is how you can explain that. Within TCP header, we have so many flags there, which are also known as control bits or control flags, right? Like SYN, which is synchronization, acknowledgement, ACK for acknowledgement, right? FIN for finish, RST for reset, right? Push or maybe urgent, right? Like that. ECE, explicit congestion experience, right? CWR, which is congestion window reduced. So in different conditions, in different scenarios, it uses different flags, but those are 9 flags in total, right? Which are also known as TCP control bits, right, Arjun? So if you have any questions around that, like we also had a small discussion over Ethernet header, and I told you that Ethernet header will always have like source MAC address and destination MAC address, right? And it could also have the .1q tag or maybe ISL header trailer if it is going through the trunk port, right? So this is what we discussed. But inside Ethernet header, you could have the .1q tag as well if you're using .1q trunk encapsulation between switches, right? So this is what we discussed before. So I'm expecting from all of you that you people are pretty well in TCP header, UDP header, in IP header, Ethernet header, the port numbers, the protocol numbers. You must be aware the differences, the real technical differences between port numbers and the protocol numbers. I hope that you remember that port numbers are from 0 to 65535, and port numbers are always part of TCP header or UDP header, whereas the protocol numbers are from 0 to 255, and protocol number is always assigned inside the IPv4 header or IPv6 header. Right, so in IPv4 header, you have a protocol field which carries the next layer protocol, right, information. So in case if IP header is containing protocol number 6, which means IP will have to hand off that data, that payload to the TCP, because TCP uses protocol number 6, UDP uses 17, EICRP uses 88, OSPF uses 89, ICMP uses 1, ICMP uses 2, right, TR uses 47, ESP uses 50, right? So these protocol numbers are really important to identify the next layer protocol. So let's say I have received a IP packet, and post receiving IP packet, I have to decide that what is next layer protocol, whether I have to hand off this EICRP or OSPF or TCP or UDP. So inside IP header, I'm always going to check for the protocol number. So if it is 6, which means I'll hand off it to TCP. If it is 17, which means I'll give it to UDP. If it is 1, which means I'll give it to ICMP. If it is 2, which means I'll give it to IGMP. If IP protocol field is having protocol number like 88, which means I'll give it to EICRP. If it's 89, then I'll give it to OSPF. If it is 47, I'll give it to GRE. If it is 50, I'll give it to ESP. You got my point? So the recipient host will always receive an IP packet, and inside IP header, it is mandatory to have the protocol field, right? If you do not have protocol field inside IP header, then it will not be possible for recipient host to identify the next layer protocol, right? Like to which protocol you have to hand off your data. Like IP has received the IP packet, but what's next, right? So to identify what's next, it will always look for the protocol field, and by looking at the protocol field, the recipient host can easily identify that, hey, this is my next layer protocol, so I need to hand off or I need to transfer this payload to this protocol. That's how it works. So, guys, if any one of you having any questions around TCP header, UDP header, the content of TCP header, the UDP header, or maybe ICMP, maybe HTTP, or maybe FTP, because I also spoke to you, or I had a small discussion about the application layer protocols, and which is really crucial, right, in regards with the F5 load balancers, right? Like you must be aware the functionality of DNS, you must be aware with the functionality of HTTP particularly, because in most cases you will be utilizing your F5 LTM load balancer for web-based applications, right, or for web servers. I mean, to perform load balancing among the web servers. So whenever you talk about the web services, which means you will always use HTTP, whether it is HTTP normal or HTTPS, it's all about the HTTP. Okay, because when I say HTTPS, which means it will use the SSL, and nowadays it uses TLS to make your connection as a secure connection. That's the only difference between HTTP and HTTPS. That HTTP will always send data in plain text format. Anyone can read your data or could read your data, but HTTPS will use TLS. Nowadays it uses TLS, and even in TLS we have different versions like 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, and then 1.3, like that. Okay. So we should always keep trying to utilize the advanced or most advanced TLS version. Nowadays, we don't use SSL. We don't prefer to use SSL, right? We prefer to use TLS because TLS provides more security over SSL. Other than that, I also asked you to understand the functionality of HTTP. Like within HTTP, I told you that, hey, there are, I mean, basically HTTP works on the request and response method, right? Request and response. Like client will always generate a request and the server will always provide the response. So we had different request methods like GET, right? The post, delete, put, right? Head, like that. And the response codes, right? The responder, which means I'm talking about the web servers, right? Web servers were responsible to provide the response back to the initiator, right? Or you get one point. So responder responded with a response code, and response codes could start with 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, right? So I also explained the differences in between the response codes starting with 1 or starting with 2 or starting with 3 or starting with 4 or 5, right? Like 4 is something like client has made some wrong request, right? 5, if your response code starts with 5, which means you have some problems at the end of server. If you have a response code of starts with 3, which means some sort of in some scenario, like, or maybe, I mean, your request was redirected, right? And if your response code is starting with 2, which means uh, somehow, I mean, somehow your request was completed successfully, right? So that's how you could identify, or you could read the response code. So I asked you to go through that, and also I asked you to go through something related to SMTP as well, right? And also I asked you to look at the FTP. Like within FTP, you have two different versions. Like one is active FTP, the other one is passive FTP, like that. Okay, guys. So that's what I was expecting you to cover. So right. So get me one second, please. Get me one second. Hey guys, I'm sorry, I'm back. So Arjun and Jagdish and Rahul, I'm asking you a question, right? I'm asking you if you have any questions around that, please go ahead and ask your questions because it is really mandatory for all of you to understand the operations of HTTP. And if you do not understand that, then it will be really difficult in future to understand the operations done by or performed by the LTM. So Arjun, if you have any questions around HTTP or whatsoever, please go ahead and ask your questions. And same goes with Jagdish and Rahul. And please unmute yourself. And did you try to go through the IP header, TCP header, and UDP header? Are you all good with that? Okay, perfect. And what about Rahul?
Hello. Yes, sir.
Do you have any questions around TCP, UDP, or as you were asking me that
The
for
flags. Yeah, yeah. I went through them. So
what
just
do
like
you know about the flags? Like inside TCP, you have 9 control flags, like SYN, FIN. So what flag you are? You want me to explain?
no, sir. I went through the Wikipedia and
And
the
it's good
header
now.
whole. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And inside the IP header, I hope that you are aware that inside IP header we have flags like DF, one fragment, right? MF,
Yes.
like more fragment, right?
More
And 1 bit was still reserved, right? So inside IP header we have only 3 flags, 3 bits for the flags. 1 bit is reserved for future use, one is for DF, and one is for MF. So that's it about the IP header and TCP header, right? As I mentioned before, you should always go through, TCP header, UDP header using like Wikipedia. You could refer, right? So like TCP header format or UDP header format, you could search it over Wikipedia, and then you could just go through this header, right? And better that you go through the TCP RFC. There are RFCs, so many RFCs for the TCP. You can see them. So TCP version 4793. So you can go through this TCP, and also um, you can see here TCP congestion control. So for congestion control, they have a different RFC. So if you can go through, you know, if you can go through these RFCs, like for example, if you go through this RFC 5681. So sometimes these people ask questions around the congestion avoidance, congestion management in TCP, right? Congestion control, and sometimes they might ask you selective acknowledgement as well. So you can open up these RFCs, and then it would be a great idea for you to go through these RFCs, right? So it explains everything, right? Like SAC permitted option, SAC option format, and then everything you can find under this RFC. So if you read these RFCs, then it will give you the best ideas about the TCP or UDP or whatsoever, right? So you can open up them here. And same goes with HTTP, as I mentioned before. So inside OSI model, like under application layer, let's say you have HTTP, right? So open up HTTP, and then for HTTP, then again you have your RFCs. So let's say you are talking about HTTP 1.1, open up this RFC. You're talking about HTTP version 2, then open up this RFC. So this way you can read about HTTP in more and more details, right? Like this. So these all are the HTTP request methods, right? Like get, head, post, put, delete, like that. And then you have those RFCs, right? So you could open this RFC here. So again, this is RFC 72321, and this RFC has all the request methods here, right? So you can just go through it. So better, like if you talk about like methods definition, right? So you can see first of all get method. So this is get, and you see that get method request transfer of a current selected representation for the target resource. Get is the primary mechanism of the information retrieval. So basically you retrieve some information by using get method, and focus of almost all performance optimizations. Hence, when people speak of retrieving some identifiable information via HTTP, they are generally referring to making a get request. It is tempting to think of resource identifier as remote file system path names and of the representation as being a copy of the content of the such file, right? So that's how you could read the get, right? So client can alter these, semantics of get to be a range request, requesting transfer of only some part or something. I mean, you can go through it by your own. And then head method is there. Head is also same as get. The only difference is that get will give you the HTTP response along with the data, actual data, but head will provide you only header, not not the message body. So in the response of head, you will never ever get the message body. Okay. I mean, it doesn't download the actual data. It is quite similar as get. It will just give you the status of the resource that you are trying to access, right? So head will not provide you message body inside it, and same goes with post. You wanna post something on the remote device, then you will be using this post method, right? So that's why I said like you should go through it, right? So a response has a body, so only head doesn't have body, right? Only head doesn't have the body, as I mentioned before, right? And that's what you could see here. And I said if your HTTP response code starts with 1, which means it has some informational type of message. 2 starts with 2, which means it was successful. It starts with 3, which means it was redirected. It starts with 4, client error. And it starts with 5. These all are status codes, like HTTP responses, right? So this is client request. This is how you do it, right? It's get HTTP version.1.1, and I want to have access to this website. And the response will look like this. Like this. This is response code, right? So if it is 200 OK, which means the request was completed successfully, right? And then this body is having what will be displayed on your page, right? Hello world, this is a very simple HTML document. So this is given by the web server, right? So that's how your response will look like, okay? So you can see here now, HTTP compression, HTTP 2.0, web cache, WebSocket, like this, right? So better, again, you go through the RFC of the HTTP. So as I mentioned before, the important for us within HTTP is to identify the HTTP request, right? Request methods, different request methods like get, head, post, put, delete, trace, options, connect, patch, like that. And then to understand the HTTP response calls, which is really important for us to perform the troubleshooting in terms of F5 load balancers, right? So that's that piece. Thereafter, as I told you before, that you should also read something related to FTP as well, right? Related to FTP, because that is also important, right? So if I go back, I'm giving you the most important documentation, right? It's not easy to read that, but it gives you a complete information, the complete knowledge about the protocol. Same goes with FTP, and again you have the RFC number for FTP as well, right? So if you scroll down, you should have the RFC number for FTP as well. So it's not there, however, yeah, it's there now, right? So FTP security extensions and like that, right? How so FTP operations over big address record. So we have different RFCs for the FTP as well, right? If you go up, if you scroll up, then you have FTP in different modes, right? The passive mode and the active mode, and you should be aware with that what are the differences between passive mode and the active mode, right? You should be aware with the differences FTP active mode and passive mode, right? So this RFC, like the original specification for the FTP, was written by Abhay Bhushan and published as RFC this on 16th April 1971. So basically FTP, this RFC was drafted by the Abhay Bhushan, right, on 16th April 1971. So you can just go through that RFC, right? Until 1980, FTP ran on NCP, the predecessor of TCP/IP. The protocol was later replaced by the TCP/IP version. So that's RFC 765, then 959, and then several proposed standard amendment in RFC 959, and then 1579 was in a came into the picture, right? And finally, it is 2428, right? So you can just go through that 2428 FTP extension. So it will tell you that what all extensions they have added in FTP, and also you could go through some of the RFCs here. Let's say passive mode, right? Passive mode, you wanna run. I mean, you wanna read about the passive mode 22. I mean, triple 28. So that's passive mode, right? So you can see FTP, and then they are talking about the FTP only, and then they will be talking about the FTP modes like active and passive, and finally they will be talking about the passive only, right? So if you wanna really touch FTP in more and more details, then better you go through these RFCs, right? As I mentioned before. But it will be it. I mean, if you read these RFCs only once in life, that will be more than sufficient. Will be more than sufficient, because no book can be better than RFCs, right? You don't have anything like RFCs, right? So I know that it will take a little long, but I mean, I would suggest you to go through the RFCs for all of open source protocols, right? So that's that. So then active mode and a passive mode, right? I mean, at least I'm going to explain the differences between active and passive FTP. So in active FTP, basically, in active FTP, the data connection is, I mean, if you are running active FTP, then your control connection will be initiated by the client, but data connection will be initiated by the server, right? FTP server. But in passive FTP, in passive mode, control connection as well as data connection, both will be initiated by client only. So that's the major difference in between the active mode and the passive mode. Okay. So you can see in active mode, the client starts listening for incoming data connection from the server port, right? So, I mean, the server will initiate the data connection in active mode, right? It sends FTP command port M to inform the server on which port it is listening. The server then initiate a data channel to the client from its port 20, the FTP server data port, right? And in in a situation where the client is behind firewall and unable to accept incoming TCP connection, passive mode may be used. In this mode, the client uses control connection to send passive command to server to the server, and to inform server that, hey, I'm using passive mode, right? And receives the server IP address and server port from the server, which the client then uses to open data connection. So basically in passive mode, the command, I mean, the control connection as well as data connection, both are initiated by the client in passive mode, right? So if you have firewall configured, right, in between client and server, then better you use passive mode. So that's that piece. Then you could also have the FTPS. Remember, like similar to HTTPS. So you could secure your FTP by using SSL. Also, you could execute FTP over SSH. This is also known as SFTP. This is also known as SFTP. If you are running FTP over SSH, this is also known as SFTP. And nowadays, SFTP is the most popular, I would say. SSH file transfer protocol, right? And that's one is FTPS. FTPS is just that you are using SSL to encrypt your FTP data, same as HTTPS. But that's not something we use in production environment. In production, in most cases, you will use SFTP. That's the SFTP. SSH file transfer protocol. You open up it, and this is SFTP. Right? That's about the SFTP. So nowadays, it is preferred to use the SFTP, and I'll teach you that how to implement SFTP in production environment, right? Also, I'll teach you that how to implement the FTP in production environment. So that's what I wanted to discuss with you about the FTP and HTTP, right? In similar way, you could also learn something about the SMTP. SMTP protocol details, right? You could read SMTP here. So you put CSMTP using Wikipedia, and you can also get a lot of other examples here, or also you could look for the RFC number here. So this RFC is all about the SMTP, right? So you can read your SMTP, you can understand that how SMTP works, right? So you can see that transport of electronic mail, right? So the objective of SMTP is to transfer mail reliably and efficiently. So SMTP is independent of the particular transmission subsystem and requires only a reliable ordered data stream channel. While this document is specifically discussed transport over TCP, other transport are possible, right? But this document is covering to configure SMTP over TCP only. And you have seen it in production environment also, right? We prefer to use SMTP over TCP only. Like SMTP uses TCP port number 25 because it uses TCP, right? An important feature of SMTP is its capability to transport mail across multiple networks using usually referred to as SMTP mail relaying, right? A network consists of the mutually TCP accessible. So basically, it's better to go through this component, this document to understand the design of the SMTP, right? Or the operations of the SMTP, right? So it will also have the component of the SMTP, everything. I mean, it should have everything around the SMTP. Wait. These are the commands that it might have within the SMTP, but also it should have, you know, what I'm looking for. One sec. Let me show you the SMTP header. So my point is that we should, I mean, you should understand the operations of SMTP, right? Before you implement it over the big IP. So I'm not having any specific document to SMTP. In fact, the F5's certification guides doesn't have any specific document only for SMTP, right? But yes, I mean, you should cover the SMTP as well. So that's all about the application layer protocol that I wanted to let you know, that which all application protocols you should cover, and you should be knowing their operations, right? So that we can implement over big IP, right, guys? That's what I wanted to discuss. Now, as I mean, I'm going to cover some other stuff now. Just a moment. So as I mentioned before, that previously we were using the DNS server, right? The DNS server, like this, to perform load sharing, right? But DNS was doing load sharing in round robin fashion. Whenever it was getting the DNS request, it was providing the DNS responses by giving an IP addresses of the real servers, in a round robin fashion. Let's say first DNS request came in, then it provided an IP address like 192.0.2.11. Next time it will provide .12 and then 11, then .12, like that. But DNS server never had any kind of monitoring. It never had that which server is overutilized or like that, whether application is currently running or what. It never had that kind of information. So nowadays, I mean, you're going to implement your F5 LTM in this scenario only. So you will always have your big IP LTM configured just before your real servers, like this, right? So here you have implemented your big IPs in a high availability. Like one is, let's say one is active, the other one is standby. But this is how you're going to implement that. So you are implementing your LTMs, your big IP LTMs, your big IP load traffic manager or load balancer in your data centers just before your real servers. That's how you will be implementing them. We have different vendors when it comes to the load balancers, like F5 is on top, Redware, Citrix, A10, Kemp, Barracuda, Rocket, Array, right, Sancfer, and AWS, right? So basically, these all are the vendors for the load balancers, but of course, you can see that F5 is on top, is among the leaders. Redware, Citrix is also there, and initially even Cisco came up with one of load balancer, but Cisco got failed, and they, they rolled back their load balancer, right? Big IP, as I mentioned before in previous class also, that you are going to have a common box here in case of the F5, right? No matter what module or what technology you want to use or what solution you want to use, like LTM, GTM, APM, ASM, doesn't matter, right? The box is going to be one, right? That's your big IP. And on top of big IP, you will be using a common operating system, which is also known as TMOS. Now, these are the different modules supported by the F5, like GTM. Now, they have renamed GTM with the DNS, and that's not normal DNS, it's intelligent DNS, right? So GTM has been renamed with DNS. Now it's not GTM anymore. It's DNS now. Local traffic manager, this is what we are going to cover here, right? So GTM is mainly for is mainly responsible to manage your DNS requests, right? So basically, GTM works as a DNS server, and that's why they have renamed it with DNS. So now they call it intelligent DNS. Basically, yeah, it is an intelligent DNS than the traditional DNS servers, right? You have a firewall as well, which is also known as AFM, Application Firewall Manager. So it's a network firewall, same as like ASA firewall, right? Then Access Policy Manager, right? APM, kind of AAA, right? Kind of AAA. And then Application Security Manager, ASM, this is also known as WAF, Web Application Firewall. So it's a firewall only for the web-based data. And then Application Acceleration Manager, which is also known as AAM, right? So AAM speeds up the application delivery and controls the growth of bandwidth demand, particularly for video. So it can like, I mean, it works similar to what your, we have a vendor specifically only for traffic optimization. I do not remember the name of that vendor at the moment, but yes, that's pretty well known. So this AAM, Application Acceleration Manager, AAM is not much popular from the F5. It's something different. It's some other vendor. I do not remember the name of that vendor exactly at this moment. I just missed that. And you can see that, Big IP always ensures that your applications are always available and fastly accessible. And of course, they are securely accessible, right? So when I say that always available, like it can perform load sharing along with redundancy. So in case if any one of the server goes down, then it will redirect the end users towards other servers. The fast, of course, it will make the performance faster than traditional routing. Secure, yes, it can secure the connectivity, the communication between the end user and your web servers. These are the different hardware platforms, and I believe that we also have discussion. We had a discussion around this in previous class also, but these are the different hardware series. But to look at the latest series, because latest series is I series, right? You can just visit the F5 website and you could look for the latest series of devices when it comes to the hardware devices, right? So these all hardware devices are appliances, and these all appliances are having different capabilities when it comes to the hardware capability, right? Like different memory, different CPU cycle, like that. Viprion chassis, I told you before, this is also known as world's largest ADC. So when I say ADC, it is application delivery controller, which means I'm talking about the big I, right? So it's the highest performing ADC in the world, right? That's 4800. Right, so it is mainly useful for service providers, large enterprises, and web-based businesses. In Viprion, you will always have to have your blades, right? And blades, like you have. Okay, this is chassis, right? So it is also. I mean, this is your chassis like 4800 for 480, 2400, right? So this is 2400. So on this 2400 chassis, you could have 2100 series of blades. At least one blade should be there, right? And it can have up to 4 blades. You can add up to 4 blades, but one blade must be there to function well, right? And then you have blades, and each blade will have this capability, like layer 4 throughput, layer 7 throughput, layer 4 connections per second, layer 7 transactions or requests per second, maximum SSL transactions per second, maximum SSL transactions with using 2000 keys. So if you are using 2K key, then you can see the performance of your blade has been reduced by 5 times. Like earlier, it was managing up to 50,000 transactions per second, but now onwards, it will manage only 10,000 transactions per second, right? So like this, you have 4480 platform as well, right? And then you have 4200 blades, right? So blades will be inserted here on chassis, right? So that's how you could define that. And then virtual edition is also there, right? So you could install them over ESXi. So local traffic manager does load balancing, right? Load balancing is load is being distributed among multiple servers, but how do I better utilize faster service or servers, right? That's the question, right? So you do not only perform the load balancing, but also you think or you decide that how you can utilize the faster servers. If you talk about the load balancing algorithms, the big IP supports like round robin, like LTM supports round robin, ratio, least connection, fastest observed, predictive dynamic ratio. So round robin and ratio, those are static one. And other than that, like least connection, fastest observed, predictive dynamic ratio, all others are known as dynamic load balancing methods. So if you talk about the static load balancing method, under static, you have round robin, 1 by 1 ratio. You could define the ratio, and in the value that you have defined under ratio, it will perform the load sharing. Least connection, it will count the total number of connections, and the server having the least connection, next user will be forwarded towards that server only. The fastest, so fastest server will be that server who is having the least number of remaining requests. Or outstanding requests, I would say. The server which is having least outstanding requests, which means that server is the fastest among all, right? Similarly, you have observed predictive and dynamic ratio like that. So this is your round robin. So you can see in round robin, your client is distributing, your client requests are distributed by the big IP LTM evenly among all servers. That's round robin. So that's by default enabled, right? Then ratio is also there. You could have different ratio, like 3:2:1. So next 3 requests will be sent. Basically 3 connections, I could say, because client is always gonna build the connections, the TCP connections with big IP, right? So big IP is gonna distribute those TCP connections among all these servers in this ratio only. So 3. Like first request went to server 1, then second server 2, third server 3, fourth server 4, then fifth server 1, sixth server 2, seventh server 1. 3:2:1:1, one cycle is completed. Now 8 server 1, 9 server 2, 10 server 3, 11 server 4, and then 12 server 1, 13 server 2, and 14 server 1. So next cycle is completed. That's how your TCP requests or connections will be distributed among all these servers by big IP. Right? So as I said, least connection, these are the dynamic load balancing algorithm. So next, user, like let's say a client is trying to have a connection with the real server. So big IP will stop the client and will see that which server is having the least number of connections, current least connections, current least active connections. So the server having the least active connections, right? So big IP will select that server only. So you can see among all servers, the server 1 is having 459 connections. So that's having the fewest open connections among all. So the next client will be forwarded towards this server only. The fastest, it will look for, so here you can see number of outstanding requests. So the server having the least outstanding request, right, will be treated as a fastest one. And the next client will be forwarded towards that server. So let's say that we have multiple servers, and at the same time, multiple servers are having the same fewest connection. So in that condition, it will perform kind of load share in a round robin way. So you can see server 1 is having 10 outstanding requests, server 2 is also having 10 outstanding requests, server 3 is also having 10 outstanding requests, and then server 4 is having 17 outstanding requests. So first 3 are having same number of outstanding requests, which is lesser than server 4, which means the LTM is gonna distribute the connection between all these servers in an even way. Observed and predictive and dynamic range that are discussed later on, right? So that's that, right? So I have just given you an idea that LTM is not the only solution provided by the FI. Apart from LTM, they also offer their customer the WAF, right? WAF is also known as Web Application Firewall, and a normal network firewall, and APM, like that. Okay, and also of course DNS, also known as intelligent DNS. Okay, so most of the service providers are nowadays using intelligent DNS instead of using traditional DNS servers, because traditional DNS servers were basically, I would say, if I rely on traditional DNS server, in most cases, that's being compromised. It's been compromised in most cases, right? So to prevent your DNS servers from DDoS attack, it's better to use a product like GTM, Global Traffic Manager, also known as Intelligent DNS. Okay. So next, I'll discuss something related to proxy as well, right? So let me open up 101. So let me have a quick discussion around 101. That book, that file material, and that's 101. So let me discuss something related to proxy here. Okay. Very good. Just a moment. Okay, that's proxy. So first I'll teach you the keyword proxy. I don't know if I have discussed it before with you, but this is what I'm going to discuss now. That's the proxy, right? So what is the full proxy architecture? So remember that by default, Big IP uses the full proxy architecture, right? So if I talk about the proxy, you know, and also it is known as the intermediate or intermediaries, right? Um, it could be hardware, it could be a software solution like Zscaler proxy, Cisco proxy, Symantec proxy, like Blue Coat. No, not Blue Coat. It's a something else. Um, Blue Coat is from Cisco only, right? I mean, there are so many proxy services available, right? So then, if you talk about the proxy, what is proxy? It is nothing but it's something like you are doing on behalf of somebody else. Then it is known as proxy, right? Let's say you are doing something on behalf of somebody else, right? So in case a proxy is there, right? So ideally, you know what happens? Let's say Cisco proxy is uh, is being configured in your network. So I have a user connected to router, gateway, and then internet. So you are using internet directly. But let's say you have a proxy now. So end user will go to proxy first, and then proxy will go to internet. So end user is gonna is will always talk to proxy, and proxy will talk to internet provider, right? And then this is how this end user is gonna have access to the internet. Basically, to provide secure internet connectivity to the end users, you might place the proxies in your network, right? So when I talk about the proxies, you might have the forward proxy or reverse proxy. So forward proxy, the best example of the forward proxy is your Cisco Iron Port, and then you have Blue Coat proxy. Blue Coat proxy is from Symantec, right? So when it comes to the forward proxy, basically forward proxy are those proxies which are configured between end user and the internet. So first end user will go to the proxy. So that's why it will be known as forward proxy, then internet, and then servers. So you have placed, if you have placed a proxy in between end user and the internet, it will be known as a forward proxy. If you have placed a proxy between real servers and internet like this, so here you have end users, then internet, and then proxy, and then servers, then it will be known as reverse proxy. So your F5 LTM, it works as a reverse proxy because F5 LTM, this load balancer is always placed in between internet and real servers, like just before real servers. Okay, then you can also divide your proxies into like half proxy or full proxy. So when I talk about the half proxy, so in case of half proxy, in most cases, you know what will happen? The initial connection will go through the proxy, and then server will respond back to the client directly without going through the half proxy, right? So that is also an example of the half proxy, right? And initial connection will be terminated by the proxy. This is also another example of the half proxy, and the subsequent connections will not be inspected by the proxy. It will directly let the end user to communicate with the server. So this is also known as half proxy. In full proxy, you know, in full proxy, the proxy server is going to build a separate TCP connection with the end user and the separate connection table with the real server. So this is what your LTM is. So your LTM is reverse full proxy because LTM is going to build a separate TCP connection table with the client and of course with the servers. So your F5 LTM is also known as reverse full proxy. Like this. So full proxy, you have a client side connection table and server side connection table. Where this is your full proxy. And in case of half proxy, you know, your proxy server will have a common connection table, right, for the client and the server. High availability is supported here. So you can configure like active standby high availability or maybe active. It's totally up to you. Any questions so far from anyone? So I hope that Arjun, I hope that you read about the proxy in Palo Alto as well, because Palo Alto is also an XN firewall, which also provides the proxy features for the end user. Does that make sense to you? Right. So whenever anybody in interview asks you that, is your LTM full proxy or half proxy? So you will say it's a full proxy, right? They might ask you that whether it is a forward proxy or reverse proxy. So you will say reverse proxy.
Reverse.
Right? Then you have a concept of persistent and persistence. So there are two different keywords here. One is persistence, one is persistent. Right? So persistent is to persist your users, the end user, right? Let's say one end user came in to big IP, LTM, and then it forwarded that to server one. Now I want that subsequent request made by the same user should go to the same server. That is called persistent, right? Oh, wait. No, that's persistence basically. What I have explained to you here is persistence. So you want to persist your connection for the end user, right? So if same end user is coming in, then it should go to the same server. That's persistence. Now in HTTP, you know what was happening before in 1.0, 1.0, that let's say you want to send the get message, right? So now you will first send the SYN, then SYN ACK will come back, you will send an acknowledgement, then get will go to your server, then it will provide you response, and then your connection will be closed. Now, if you want to send another get message, again you will establish the TCP three-way handshake. You will establish the TCP connection, and then will send the get. Response will come back, and the TCP connection will get closed. That was happening in 1.0. Now, to download a single web page, you might have to send multiple get messages. So for each transaction, it was needed to establish a new TCP connection for each HTTP transaction. So when I say HTTP transaction, which means get and response. But they came up with a new solution in HTTP 1.1, right? So what happens in 1.1, that let's say you have a sender, and then you have a server, you have a client, right? So it wants to send the get message. So it will send the SYN, then SYN plus ACK will come back, and then acknowledgement, and then get will be given to your server. The server will respond back, and in response, it will enable the keep alive message, so that now these devices will not terminate this TCP connection. So that in case if it needed to send another get message, so it can send the get message over the same TCP connection. So they have reduced the latency in TCP by utilizing the persistent feature, right? So that's part of HTTP 1.1. It was not there before in HTTP 1.0, but in 1.1, yes, it is there. Difference between client and server, I don't really have to explain it, right? Differences between client and server. Thereafter, they are talking about the security. Security could be like, if I talk about the security model, then it could be positive security model or negative security model. So the meaning of positive security model is that whatever you want to allow, you allow it explicitly, you allow it manually, and rest will be denied. That's positive security model, that you are allowing whatever you want to allow. The negative security model is something like you denied something and rest is allowed. You are denying something and then rest is allowed. So that's your negative security model. Thereafter, like ideally firewalls, you can configure them in using positive security model or negative security model. Anyone, anything, right? Either you could say on your firewall, hey, this is allowed, this is allowed, this is allowed, and everything else is denied. So that's positive security model. You could also say, hey, this is denied, and everything else is allowed. So that's negative security model. In case of firewalls, we prefer to use positive security model. Now let's talk about the IPS IDS, right? So in IPS IDS, it's predefined based on signature that this is allowed and this is denied. right? And this is denied and everything is allowed based on IPS and IDS signatures, right? So that follows basically negative security model. So IPS IDS, this device follows negative security model. Whatever denied, it's denied. Rest allowed. Okay. So good security and right. So again, they are talking about the positive, negative application security. So you just go through it by your own, right? Thereafter, the best practice, as I said, for firewalls, it's preferred to use the positive security model. For IPS, IDS feature, it's preferred to use negative security model. And signing cryptography is there, right? Like how to secure your data using SSL. In SSL, you use digital certificate, right? Digital certificates, like certificate authority is there, who will be responsible to generate the certificate, right? Go ahead.
So in F5, what security model we selected? Positive and negative.
It's all positive. It's all positive. Whatever you want to allow it. Rest is denied. As I said, I believe that. I mean, in case of F5 load balancers, right? Nothing is allowed by default. Nothing is allowed. Everything will be dropped. Like no packet can traverse your F5 load balancer. You have to allow that. Okay? By creating virtual servers, or maybe by creating NAT, by configuring NAT. Okay, and by adding routes. So you allow your traffic explicitly on your F5. It's not allowed by default. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah. In similar way, ACLs are created. Either you will create your ACLs, like let's say you are creating ACLs for traffic filtering, for data filtering. Either you will create them in this way, like, hey, this traffic is allowed and rest is denied. Or maybe this is denied, this is denied, this is denied, everything is allowed. Everything else is allowed. Any questions, sir?
No, sir.
All right. That's good. All right, guys. So you should be understand, like when it comes to the cryptography, right? Again, in Palo Alto, I hope that you have seen that. But again, I'm going to explain that, right? So you must have heard about the public-private keys and cryptography, right? The combination of public-private keys and the encryption, the symmetric encryption, the asymmetric encryption keys, right? Symmetric encryption keys, asymmetric encryption keys, like that. Okay, so if you use a common key for your encryption, right? A common key, then that's known as symmetric. I mean, those keys will be known as symmetric keys, right? If you are using different keys for encryption and decryption, which is also known as asymmetric encryption, right? So remember, for authentication, you can go for asymmetric encryption, but for bulk data encryption, you will always go for the symmetric encryption. Like I hope that you remember the PKI, public key infrastructure, right? So you know the combination of public and private keys, and you know in case of mostly like in case of client and web server. So if I talk about the client and web server, and let's say you are using SSL, right? So what happens? Like client will try to access a website from the web server, right? So whenever you will send a client hello, let's say first they established the TCP connection, and post TCP connection establishment, the client is going to generate, since it is using HTTPS, so it will be using either SSL or TLS, so it's going to generate the client hello, right? Client hello packet, where inside client hello, the client will define that, hey, I support all these parameters, encryption, hashing, and like that, okay? Thereafter, it will reach out to the server, and server is going to send the server response as well as the server hello message, the server hello as well as the server certificate, right? So server will send its hello message as well as the server certificate. Now client is going to receive that certificate, right? And post receiving that certificate, it will check whether the certificate is valid or invalid. It must be a valid certificate, else it will give you a error message that this certificate or this connection is not a secure connection, because certificate is not a valid certificate. If it was a valid certificate, then it will go ahead and it will, now the client and server, they will authenticate to each other using asymmetric keys, but finally they will negotiate with a common key, which will be known as a symmetric key for bulk data encryption and decryption, right? So for bulk data encryption decryption, you will always use the symmetric key, and for authentication, yes, you can utilize the asymmetric key. So when I say asymmetric key, you use different keys like private and public keys for the authentication purposes. Like you use two different keys, right? And in symmetric key or in symmetric encryption, you will use a common key at both ends for encryption and decryption purposes, right? So private key encryption, like private key encryption is the standard form. Both parties share an encryption key, right? And the encryption key is also one used to decrypt the message, right? The difficulty is sharing the key before you start encrypting the message. How do you safely transmit it, right? So private key, you don't share it with anybody else. So many private key encryption methods use public key encryption to transmit the private key for each data transfer session, right? So remember that you will never ever share your private keys with anybody else. You will share only public keys, right? So let's say I have a digital certificate, right? I'm a web server and client has made a request. Now I'm going to represent my certificate. So in my certificate, I'll add only public keys, not private keys. Remember that server will never ever share the private keys with anybody else. So whenever SSL negotiation happens, remember that private keys are never shared with anyone, right? Only public keys are shared. So I said symmetric encryption, asymmetric encryption. In symmetric encryption, you will use asymmetric key. In asymmetric encryption, you will use asymmetric, like as a solution for the not completely safe symmetric encryption, there is a asymmetric encryption system, uses a pair of keys, as I said, private and public key. But in symmetric encryption, you use only one key, right? So the private key is for yourself and the public key is to publish online for the others to see. The public key is used to access the encryption code that corresponds to your private key. So if you were sending encrypted message to Suzanne, which you do not want others to see, you would use her public key to encrypt it, and she will be able to decrypt it with her own corresponding private key. So let's say I have a public private key. You want to send some data to me. I'll share my public key with you. You will encrypt the data with public keys, and now it's me only who has the private key. Because if you encrypted your data with using public key, then only the user having private key can decrypt the data. Remember, if you encrypted your data using public keys, you cannot decrypt it using same public key. No, that's not possible, because that's asymmetric. In asymmetric encryption, let's say you encrypted your data using public keys. Now the data can be decrypted using private keys only. Okay, and private key you do not share with anybody else. So let's say I am having public private key. I know that you, Arjun, you want to send some data to me. I'll share my public keys with you. You will encrypt data with public keys that I have shared with you, and you will give it to me. Now, I will be only person who can decrypt the data. It might possible that maybe Rahul or somebody else can receive that data, right? But they will not be able to decrypt that because they do not have that private key, right? So I'll never share my private key with somebody else, because if your private keys are compromised, then you will have to reissue the certificate. You will have to apply for a new certificate then. So as I said, authentication, all right? So mainly you will use the asymmetric encryption for the authentication purposes only, right? Single sign-on, you should be aware nowadays single sign-on is really, is popular, right? SSO, single sign-on. So ideally, we are using the like for SSO, we are using SAML, right? SAML. So you use either single sign-on or maybe you use MFA, multi-factor authentication. So in production environment, you have both. You have single sign-on, you have multi-factor authentication enabled, right? So if you have a very critical box, then ideally you would go for the MFA, multi-factor authentication. Like for example, if you are trying to log in onto your laptop, first you will have to provide your password to log in onto your Windows, right? So that's first level of authentication. Second, you want to interconnect yourself to the corporate network, then you will have to authenticate yourself with using RSA token, right? So that's called like multi-factor authentication. Single sign-on is something different. Let's say um, I have created a portal, right? And on that portal, I do have access to multiple customers' resources, right? But what I want that if Saurabh is if Saurabh wants to authenticate, or if Saurabh was successful to authenticate himself successfully, right? Then Saurabh should be able to access all the resources without authenticating again, which are allocated to Saurabh. Let's say I have access to multiple resources, right? So ideally what happens that if I am accessing a resource A, I will have to authenticate myself. Then next time if I am accessing resource B, again I'll have to authenticate myself. But in case of SSO, in case of single sign-on, what happens that let's say I authenticated myself successfully, then all the resources allocated to me will be displayed to me. So whenever I'll try to access some other resources which are allocated to me, so I don't have to authenticate myself again and again. So that is an advantage of SSO. SAML is basically used for the SSO purposes. SAML is like a protocol, right? AAA, you should be aware with that what's AAA, and this is SAML, right? This is used for SSO. So SAML stands for SAML stands for what's the full form of SAML? SAML, what's the full form of it? I'll have to check that. It's not there. It is there. Security Assertion Markup Language, right? So that's SAML, right? So for SSO, you will actually mostly you will utilize the SAML, right? We don't have much things here about the SAML, so I'm not going to focus more over SAML, right? Then SSL VPN, you know it very well. IPsec VPN, you know it very well. So SSL VPN ideally, I mean, if I talk about the SSL or IPsec VPN, so IPsec VPN is kind of site-to-site VPN, right? And when I talk about the SSL VPN, so SSL VPN is like to provide you access to some of your your resources available in your corporate network. So, for example, if you want to provide the access of some resources over an internet, like you for the people doing work from home, then you could provide the access of those resources to your end users using SSL VPN, right? So you can provide the access of web resources to your end users doing work from home using SSL VPN. Okay. So IPsec is not, I mean, IPsec you can configure between firewalls or routers, but not for the end user. So end user should use the SSL only. So this is how you configure the SSL VPN appliance. So like these users are connected to internet and wanted to have the access of these corporate resources. So first they will have to connect themselves to the SSL VPN appliance. They will have to connect through the SSL VPN to the corporate network, and thereafter they can have access to these resources. Okay. Then the platforms, you have hardware, software, as I mentioned before, right? And these are the virtual editions, starting, maximum, and the least one capability for the virtual appliances. these are hardware appliances and their capabilities. You should be aware with that, right? And of course, we will dig more, or we will learn in details that how to perform TCP optimization by utilizing the TCP profile onto your big IPs, right? So now, I mean, we had a discussion about the theory, right? Now let's talk about the box itself, right? So if I talk about the box, then let me just go through it. So let me just go through it. So this is how your box will look like, your hardware box, like this, okay? So you have Ethernet ports, you have gigabit SFPs, like for the fiber optics, fiber optic ports, you have fan ports are there, you have control points or your control section, like arrows are there, like you can even configure the management IP, and even you have a LCD panel, a small LCD panel, and this is the only one network device where I have seen this LCD panel. If you are working on Palo Alto firewall, or you are working on ASA firewalls, routers, switches, you will never ever get this LCD panel. But on F5 load balancer, you will always get this LCD panel, right? And status, you can see here, you have LEDs which are defining here the status of this box. You have management port, where you can assign which is already configured to obtain an IP address from the DHCP server, right? You also have a console port, so you can even access this box using console port if you have a console cable, but also using management port. Also, you have a USB ports available, so if you wanted to upload some images, some data onto your big IP, you could leverage USB ports, and then you could use a flash drive, and then you could copy paste your data, right? Then you have a failover port as well over here, like serial port. So serial cable you could have to perform failover. So you could use either serial cable to perform failover, or you could use a network-based failover. So it's totally up to you. So these all are the ports available on your box. As I mentioned before, even you could configure the management IP using these arrows, the control panel. Okay. Management port in Linux, it is also known as ETH0. So if you want to assign an IP address to your management port and you are in Linux mode, then assign an IP address to your ETH0. As I said, in using CLI, you have two different ways to configure your big IP. One, using Linux. Second, using TMOS. So TMOS is Traffic Management Operating System from the F5 itself. So within TMOS, you will be using TMOS-based commands. But if you are inside Linux, then you will be using Linux-based commands. So within CLI, you have two different types of or two different methods to configure your box, using Linux and using TMOS. So that's how your hardware box looks like. Then this is how you could configure the IP address. So just go to console and then type config. Type just config, C1FIG, and hit enter. Then config utility will open up, right? And then you could assign the management IP to your management interface. Also, you could define the default gateway for the management network, if any, right? So that's where you could configure. Then big IP setup utility, first you will have to install the license, and then only you will be able to perform something on your box. Remember, if you do not install the license, you will not be able to do anything on your box as long as you do not install the license. So to perform anything on your box, like for example, you wanted to assign an IP address to your network interfaces, right? You wanted to add nodes, pools, right? So you cannot do that unless you install the license. So installing license is compulsory to work on big IP. So it's the same platform, but as I mentioned before, big IP is going to be common for all modules. It will be all depending. It will all depending upon the license type. So let's say you have a big IP, TMOS installed on top of that, and then you install the license of LTM. Then this box will start working as LTM, or maybe you install the license of GTM, which means it will start working as GTM. If you install the license of LTM and GTM both, then it will start working as LTM and GTM both. However, this is not recommended by F5. Like you should not enable two different modules on a single appliance. Okay. So first, license. Then second, you should perform provisioning. Third, you should change the password. Fourth, then you should start with the standard configuration. Okay. So license is, there are two different ways to install the license. One is automated. Second is manual. So in case if you are using the automated way to install the license on your big IP, then make sure that your big IP is having an internet connectivity. If your big IP doesn't have internet connectivity, then you cannot go for the automated thing, right? And you must have the base registration key, and it will come with the license. So if you have purchased license from the F5, they will always provide you the registration keys. You will just insert those registration keys. Just get me one sec. Sir, आप निकल रहे हो? All right, guys, I'm back. So, as I said, if you want to install the automated license on Big IP, then your Big IP must have an internet connectivity, right? If your Big IP doesn't have internet connectivity, like Big IP, I'm talking about the box itself, right? So, box itself must have an internet connectivity. If it has internet connectivity, then you could go for the automated way of license installation. The only thing that you should have is the registration key, assign registration key, and then select automatic, and then click activate, and that's it. You don't have to do anything extra, right? The only thing that you have to select the interface, whether you have internet access over the management interface or you do have internet access on some other interface. So that's what you have to do. Then license, the manual, in case if your big IP doesn't have an internet connectivity, right, then you could go for the manual license installation. But in that case also, your laptop, your machine, where you do have an access to your big IP, let's say you have access to the UI interface of big IP on this PC, then at least you should have an internet access to this PC. ना वो यहाँ से बंद है. Right, guys? So, you could leverage any one of them. So, I'll be teaching you both of ways of installing the license. One using automated, second manual. So, I'll be using both of the methods, right? Second, provisioning, which is really important, right? It's not sufficient to install only license. Even you have to perform the provisioning, right? So, in provisioning, right, you allocate resources to your different modules. Like, for example, I have a big IP appliance. It has certain amount of memory. It has certain power of CPU, and of course, the disk. Right now, if I want to use my big IP only for LTM, so I'll just say, hey, I want to use it. I want to use it only for LTM. Fine, go for it. Right. Then at the same time, if I wanted to enable LTM and GTM both on this device, then I'll have to provision. I'll have to perform the provisioning accordingly, right? LTM is usually provisioned, which means you don't have to do anything additional for the LTM, because by default your big IP does provisioning for the LTM. If you don't want, then you can, let's say you wanted to perform provisioning only for the GTM, you could do that, right? This is how you can assign an IP address to your management IP using UI. Let's say you had access to your big IP using UI, user interface. Let's say you have access it using management interface. Later on, also you could change the, you could change the management IP address or root password, admin password. So remember that you will be using root password to log in onto your box using CLI. So for CLI, you have root password, root user ID and password, and for GUI access, you have admin user ID and password. So if you want to have access to your box using CLI, use root user ID and password. If you want to have UI access, like user interface, like using GUI, then your user ID and password will be admin, right? So the default password for the root account is default, DEFAULT. DEFAULT. That's the default password for the root, right? And for admin, the password is also admin, like admin, right? So that's the default password for the admin account. However, you should always change it to something else, right? So now they have, as I mentioned before, that in DMOS, they have DMOS versions. So when I talk about the DMOS versions, like 12, 13, 14, 15. So the latest is 15, but I'll be doing practicals over version 14. The exams are still held using version 13. So but you know, there are no much differences between version 13 and 14. So I'll be covering your training using TMOS version 14. So in TMOS version 14, let's say you are trying to log in onto your box very first time, and you logged in using root and password default DEFAULT, right? So the first time you log in, immediately it will ask you to change your password, and that cannot be same. And they have also enforced end users to follow the password policy. Like they have changed the password policy as well. Like you must use at least one capital letter, the small letters, the the special characters, the numerical numbers, like that. Okay, so combination of that. You could also configure your management IP to obtain an IP address from the DHCP server. Also, you could define manually. So that's what we will cover during our practice, right? Then you could start doing the configuration of high availability, but that's not something that I'm going to cover as of now. And as soon as you install the license and you perform the device provisioning, thereafter, like once it is completed, then you will start seeing this option available on your gig IP using GUI, using UI, that's local traffic. So if local traffic tab is available, which means now you can utilize your box as a LTM. Okay. So as I said, like you could enable SSH for command line. You could define, you could configure management IP, self IPs, and then for SCCP, SCCP will be important for you to upload or to copy some data from your big IP to some your FTP servers or like that, right? So serial terminal is also there, like console. So it's up to you, right? The backup process is quite easy here in the format of UCS files. Just click on create, go to archive and create, and that's it. You are done. Hardware platforms, I had a discussion. These are Viprion devices, so I don't have to discuss about that, right? So you have some add-on hardware as well, like SSL accelerator, like that, right? So I'm not going to discuss anything about that as of now. And thereafter, let me tell you here. So the case, you can create a technical case with F5 by doing a direct call to their support, or maybe by going to a portal at Ask F5. Okay. The information, if you need some information, the information that they would require before you open up the ticket with the F5 support team, like the serial number of the system, the problem description and impact, contact information, product documentation. Okay. Also, you could look for the solutions by yourself, right? And like they have one website called tac.f5.com. Also, they have askf5.com website. So like that. Okay. Then load balancing will start. So before I start with the load balancing, I'll have to provision all these devices. Like I'll have to perform the basic practicals or basic labs, right? So to perform the basic labs, what I have to do is first I'll have to teach you that how you can deploy your boxes. Because if it was a hardware, then I'll just turn on. I'll just power on the device, and post power on the device, I'll just go and I'll just go and I'll have access to the device using console cable or maybe using management interface, right? But this time, since I'm going to utilize the virtual edition, so I must have a VMware workstation installed on my laptop. So I have VMware workstation installed on my laptop. This is how you can have access to it, right? And thereafter, you could deploy it your OWA file. So you just have to download your OWA file, okay? So you could say like new virtual machine, and then you could select your OWA file here, right? So typical next, and then you could select your OWA. You could deploy your OWA file over here, right? So that's where like virtual machine, next installer disk image or later or like that. Next or what? So create a new virtual machine. There should be some option of deploying the OWA file directly. I got it. Actually, if you have a over file, right, go to that over file directly. Let's say I'm having this over file, right? So let's say this is my over file. Just double click on it. It will automatically open in your VMware workstation. And if you have ESXi installed on your server, then over ESXi you have an option of deploying the over file, right? So you could say I accept, and then thereafter it will ask that where do you want to install it. You will have to provide the location, and that's how you're gonna deploy it. I'm not going to deploy it, but I just wanted to, I mean, I can deploy it basically. Let me do one thing. Let me see that on which drive I have what amount of storage available. So E, that's fine. So let me double click on our file once again. That's my version 14. I accept terms of the license agreement. So say next, then browse, install it on drive. Computer, drive E, make a new folder, test for testing, big IP, right? Select that for testing big IP, say next, then assign some CPU cores and the RAM. So let me assign 4 CPUs and 8 GB of RAM so that it will perform well. Say import. So now it is importing that over file here within the VMware workstation, which will take like a couple of minutes. Once done, thereafter I'll have access to it. Okay. All right. So now turn this on. So it will get started now. This is how it will start booting up. So just imagine that you have accessed your device using console cable and now it's booting up. This is how it will boot up, right? In real scenario also, like you had a hardware device and then you had console access to that hardware device. So this is how it will boot up, right? It will display, it will provide you the same display as it is showing you here, right? There will not be any difference actually. All right, this is how it will look like. So first time you will log in using root and the password is default DEFAULT. It will ask to change your password right now. So current password is DEFAULT. The new password is like I capital Medita at 123. I capital Medita at 123. So this is how I'll change it, right? So it's been changed. And now the same password has been applied for the admin as well. So you can read it. The password for admin user ID has been changed to match the new password for the root user ID. Okay. The password for admin user ID is marked as expired and must be changed the next. But now the password for admin user is also the same as that you configured for the root now. Okay. So it's not admin now, right? It's now, I mean, the password has been changed for admin user as well, right? So now I just have to see that what is an IP address on the management interface. To see that, I'll just type, I'm inside Linux mode as of now, right? Linux mode. So if I say config, it will take me to the F5 management port setup. So I'll say, okay, so I want to configure IPv4, right? So that's the default IP. 0.13 it has picked up, right? But let's say I wanted to change this IP address. I don't want to use it, so I'll say no. And then I said, let's say 2 dot, let's say, I said 2.244, right? Or maybe 245, or maybe 2.100, like this. Subnet mask, no default gateway, so no. I want to use these settings, yes. So that's how you could configure the IP address on management interface using Linux. So you just type config, post, typing config and pressing enter. It took you through the F5 management port setup, right? Or other way was to go to TMSH, or maybe using ifconfig command, right? If config, if 0, you should be knowing that. You should be knowing the Linux command, or go to TMSH. TMSH, now you are inside TMOS, like Cisco IOS. And now here the command would be list space management IP. That's the management IP. To modify that, say config, create management, create sys management IP, and then management IP. Let's say I wanted to change it to 2.1/34, like this. Then save sys config. So, it's up to you that how do you want to configure your management interface IP using config inside Linux mode. Like you said, quit. You are back in Linux mode. Say config, go to F5 management port setup, or go to TMSH and then say create this management IP and then IP address and mask. Okay. So the current IP address is like list this management IP. So that's 2.111. Now I'll have to connect this big IP to my management switch. To connect, so I'll go to settings and then I'll change its interface settings. So it should be different one. So I cannot, or let me try to change it. So first, that's my VMNet 1, which is my management switch. So I have connected it to my management switch. So as soon as I connected it to my management switch, now from my machine, I should be able to reach it. So ping at 2.111. So it's reachable. Now I'll try to access it using UI, that is user interface or GUI. So I will try to access it using HTTPS, and that's 2.111, like this. So it is asked, you see, the certificate is not valid because, this certificate was invalid for me. So I'll just say accept the risk and continue. The default username is admin. The password was that we allocated for. So it will say now that it's been expired. So current password and new password, I'll keep it same as before. I made it at 123 and I encapsulate. So that's how I'm gonna change it. Then save it. The password changed successfully. Save it. Admin. I made it at 123. Login, save, and you saved it. You have GUI access to your box, right? So you have GUI access to your box, but the problem is that there is no license. And since there is no license, then you cannot configure anything. You cannot enable any service on this box without installing license. Even you cannot say, like, you cannot go ahead, right? You cannot go and perform resource provisioning, or you cannot assign an IP address, or you cannot configure DNS IP like that. You cannot do anything without installing the license. Now you should be knowing that how to install the license, and that's something that we will cover tomorrow. So for today, whatever we have covered so far is sufficient. Tomorrow I'll continue from here. So first I'll teach you that how to install license, how to perform resource provisioning, and then I'll start with the basic stuff like how to configure DNS, how to configure NTP, how to take backup, how to restore, right? And how to create user ID and password, right? So I mean, tomorrow I'm going to cover the complete basic stuff of this big IP, okay? But this is how you would have access to your GUI, okay? So I had access to it using management interface, and the IP address that I assigned to the management interface was 2.111. Then I connected my virtual machine to my management switch. I mean, I connected this big IP's management port to my management switch. And as soon as I had connectivity from my management switch to this management port of this big IP, and then, you know, I started to have access, I started to have the GUI access to this big IP. So if anyone having any questions, please do let me know, right? And one more thing I would like to discuss with you guys, with all of you. So Arjun, if you want to practice over big IP, right? If you want to have the lab access online, then go to our online portal, which is your mylabdc.mylabs, right? .cloud. Get logged in using your user ID and password, and then, you know, if you are allocated a lab, then you will have this screen available in front of you. And let's say you wanted to have access to your F5 lab. So F5 is, I mean, it will look like this, F5 LTM, double click on it, and then this lab is there, right? So you can have this lab is already there. We have two big IPs in this lab, and then you can have GUI access to your big IPs from this management PC, right? And then this is your data center, right? In your data center, you have an edge box, and then you have your couple of servers along with web and FTP servers. Then you have an internet service provider, and then you have a customer network connected to the internet service provider. And from this customer use, I mean, from this customer end, you will perform your testing, right? Whether you have access to your applications, web applications or not, or maybe FTP servers or not. I mean, you have access to your FTP servers or not, right? But if you want to make some configuration on your big IP, then you will have GUI access to your big IPs onto your management PC. So from this management PC, you can have access, you can have GUI access to these big IPs, and that's how you will perform this practice. So if you really want, then I can start doing and I can start using this lab in front of you, so that you are also familiar that how to access this lab and then how to perform practical using this lab. So it's up to you that how you want to proceed. But I usually prefer to use my own lab, because if I save my config, I'll get it as it, okay, as it is. But here I have found sometimes, ideally, our configuration should remain same, should remain available onto all boxes. But sometimes I observed that we lost our configuration. And in fact, if you remember, Rahul, last time we observed that, right? But you people can also try to access this lab, and then you can start doing practice on it. You can try to save your configuration, and next class or next day, it should remain there, okay? So that's the online lab that we have, and you can start doing practice. I mean, as of today, of course, you don't know anything about it, so you cannot make the practice. Okay? So, all right, that's it for today, and I'll continue it tomorrow now. So if anyone, like Arjun, if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask your question. If not, then I'll wind up the class and we'll see you tomorrow. Rahul and Jagdish, please read RFCs. I'm repeating my words. Please read RFCs for the application layer protocol, especially for HTTP, FTP, SMTP. Okay? All right. So see you tomorrow and bye for now.
Okay, sir.